I would recommend to watch part 1 video first as these places are in sequence. The link is in description. 5. The Quarantine Station, Sydney, New South Wales. The quarantine station was first established in 1833, during a time when Sydney was growing rapidly as a colony. Ships arriving from Europe, Asia, and other parts of the world carried not only new settlers and goods but also deadly diseases. To protect the local population, the quarantine station was built as a place where anyone suspected of carrying contagious illnesses such as smallpox, bubonic plague, cholera, and influenza would be detained, often for weeks or months. Located at North Head, on the beautiful but isolated shores of Sydney, the station was perfectly positioned to keep the sick away from the general population. However, despite the beauty of its location, the quarantine station was anything but a peaceful retreat. Those who were sent there were often in poor health, frightened, and uncertain about their future. For many, it became a place of misery and death. The station was equipped with rudimentary medical facilities, and while some did recover, thousands died within its walls, unable to survive the harsh conditions or the ravages of their illnesses. The bodies of the deceased were buried in mass graves nearby, and it is said that the restless souls of those who perished there remained trapped, unable to move on. During the station's operation in the 19th century, it saw numerous outbreaks of disease, and it became a place of fear and despair. Ships arriving in Sydney Harbour were met with inspectors who determined if any passengers showed signs of illness. If even one case was found, the entire ship's passengers and crew would be sent to the quarantine station, no matter their class or social status. For many, arriving at the station was akin to receiving a death sentence. The conditions were harsh, with overcrowded quarters, poor sanitation, and minimal medical care. The sick were often kept separate from their families, further adding to the emotional toll of isolation. Many died alone, away from their loved ones. As the years went on, the station grew, with additional wards, dormitories, and morgues built to accommodate the increasing numbers of those afflicted with disease. Death became a regular part of life at the quarantine station, and the heavy atmosphere of sorrow that lingered there would eventually give rise to stories of ghostly hauntings. As early as the late 1800s, there were whispers of ghostly encounters at the quarantine station. Staff and patients alike reported hearing strange noises at night, footsteps echoing down empty hallways, whispers coming from rooms that were supposed to be vacant, and the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. These early rumors grew over time, and by the early 20th century, the quarantine station had developed a reputation as a place not only of physical suffering but also of supernatural activity. Many believed that the souls of those who had died there, particularly those who perished in terrible pain or fear, had never left. One of the most famous spirits believed to haunt the quarantine station is that of a young girl who died of the plague. Witnesses have reported seeing her wandering the station's children's ward, dressed in a simple white gown. Some say they hear the sound of her crying, while others claim to have seen her standing at the foot of their beds at night, her face pale and her eyes hollow with sadness. As medical knowledge and technology advanced in the early 20th century, the quarantine station was still in use, but diseases became less frequent and more treatable. It continued to operate throughout World War I and World War II, quarantining those exposed to influenza and other epidemics. However, by the mid-20th century, the need for such a facility dwindled, and the station's operations were gradually reduced. In 1984, after more than 150 years of operation, the quarantine station finally closed its doors. But the stories of strange occurrences, ghost sightings, and unexplained phenomena had already taken hold of the public imagination. Shortly after its closure, paranormal investigators, curious visitors, and thrill seekers began exploring the station, hoping to uncover the truth behind the ghost stories. What they found only added to the legend. There are several spirits said to haunt the quarantine station, each with their own tragic story. One of the most well-known ghosts is known as the Grieving Woman. She is believed to be the spirit of a woman who was brought to the station along with her children. Her children tragically died of illness while in quarantine, and it's said that her overwhelming grief prevented her from leaving this world. Visitors have reported seeing her apparition sitting by the gravesites, weeping softly as she mourns her lost children. Some have even claimed to feel a sudden rush of cold air when passing through the area where her spirit is most often seen. Another frequent paranormal occurrence involves the ghostly nurses who worked at the station. Many who visit the station today report feeling as though they are being watched by unseen figures in the hospital wards. Some say they've seen nurses walking through the halls, carrying out their duties as though they were still tending to the sick. These spectral nurses are described as caring spirits, but their presence can still be unsettling, especially when visitors suddenly hear the sound of footsteps or catch glimpses of figures disappearing into the shadows. Perhaps the most unsettling ghostly presence is that of the station master, a man who was known to be strict and cold during his time at the station. His spirit is said to roam the administration building, where he oversaw the daily operations. Visitors have reported hearing his booming voice echoing through the halls, giving orders to invisible staff. Others have felt a sudden sense of dread upon entering his office, as though they were being watched by a malevolent force. Given its long-standing reputation as one of the most haunted places in Australia, the quarantine station has been the subject of many paranormal investigations. Over the years, numerous groups of ghost hunters, psychics, and researchers have explored the site, hoping to capture evidence of the spirits said to linger there. These investigations have yielded some intriguing results. Investigators have recorded strange sounds, such as disembodied voices and footsteps, as well as unexplained cold spots in certain areas of the station. EVP recordings have captured eerie voices, with some clearly calling out names or issuing warnings. One particularly chilling incident occurred when a group of investigators was exploring the morgue, where many of the bodies of those who died at the station were prepared for burial. As they were setting up their equipment, they suddenly felt an intense cold and heard the unmistakable sound of metal trays being moved. When they turned on their cameras, they captured footage of what appeared to be a shadowy figure moving through the room. The morgue is often considered one of the most haunted areas of the station, and many visitors have reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread upon entering. Some claim they've seen the shadows of figures lying on the metal slabs, as though the spirits of the deceased are still waiting for their final rest. Some believe that the traumatic deaths of those who perished there have left an indelible mark on the site, trapping their souls in a state of unrest. Others suggest that the isolation and loneliness felt by those who died far from their families have caused their spirits to remain, seeking closure they never received in life. Some speculate that the spirits of the quarantine station may be attached to the land itself. The site at North Head has long been considered a sacred place by the Aboriginal people of the area, and it's possible that the spiritual energy of the land has contributed to the station's haunted reputation. 4. The Princess Theatre, Melbourne, Victoria. The history of the Princess Theatre begins in the mid-19th century. Located on Spring Street in Melbourne, it originally opened in 1854 as a smaller structure known as Astley's Amphitheatre, a place designed for circus performances. As Melbourne's population grew and the city's cultural life flourished, there was a growing need for a proper venue to host more refined performances, such as operas and plays. In 1886, the amphitheatre underwent a massive transformation, thanks to architect William Pitt, who rebuilt it into the majestic theatre that we see today. It was renamed the Princess Theatre, and with its opulent design, lavish interiors, and state-of-the-art technology for the time, it quickly became one of Melbourne's most prestigious entertainment venues. The theatre's grand reopening on December 18, 1886, marked a turning point in Melbourne's cultural scene. Its lavish Victorian-style architecture, complete with ornate balconies, chandeliers, and a richly decorated ceiling, made it a beloved venue for opera, theatre, and musical performances. Audiences from all walks of life flocked to the Princess Theatre to witness some of the finest productions in the country. The theatre's reputation grew, and it became the home to many famous performances, including international and local productions. However, little did the patrons and performers of the time know that this grand venue would soon become home to something much more mysterious than just the arts. One of the most defining moments in the history of the Princess Theatre occurred on March 3, 1888, during a performance of the opera Faust. The lead role of Mephistopheles, the devil in the story, was played by a talented Italian-born baritone named Frederick Baker, who was better known by his stage name, Frederick Federici. As the story of Faust reached its climactic conclusion, Federici's character descended through a trapdoor in the stage, a dramatic moment symbolizing the devil taking Faust to hell. It was a stunning performance, and Federici executed it flawlessly. But tragically, as he made his final descent beneath the stage, something went terribly wrong. Moments after completing the scene, Federici suffered a fatal heart attack. He collapsed beneath the stage and passed away almost instantly. The news of his death shocked the cast and crew, especially since the audience and many of the performers were completely unaware that anything had happened. Federici had performed his role so perfectly that no one suspected he was in distress. But here's where the story takes a ghostly turn. Despite Federici's tragic death, many of his fellow performers claimed that they saw him bowing with them on stage during the curtain call. They insisted that they felt his presence and even saw him standing beside them, as though his spirit had stayed to take part in the final applause. It was this eerie event that gave rise to the legend of Frederick Federici's ghost, and his presence at the Princess Theatre has been a cornerstone of its haunted history ever since. After Federici's death, it didn't take long for stories of supernatural encounters to start circulating among the theater's staff and performers. It is said that Federici's ghost never left the Princess Theatre, and many believe that he still haunts the venue to this day. Over the years, numerous actors, crew members, and even audience members have reported strange and unexplained occurrences within the theater. One of the most common sightings is that of a shadowy figure in formal evening attire, believed to be Federici, wandering the backstage area or appearing in the dress circle where he often watched performances. Actors performing at the theater have reported seeing the figure of a man standing in the wings, watching them intently during rehearsals. When they try to approach him or get a closer look, the figure vanishes into thin air. Others have felt a sudden, inexplicable chill in the air or heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. One of the most famous stories involves an actor who was preparing for a performance late at night. As he rehearsed his lines, he suddenly felt someone brush past him. Turning around, he expected to see a fellow cast member, but to his surprise, there was no one there. Moments later, he saw a figure dressed in an old-fashioned costume standing in the shadows, watching him. When he approached, the figure disappeared. These encounters with Federici's ghost have become such a well-known part of the theater's lore that they are often embraced by the performers. In fact, many believe that seeing or feeling Federici's presence is a good omen for the show. It's said that if Federici attends the opening night, the production is destined for success. Over time, the legend of Frederick Federici's ghost became so ingrained in the culture of the Princess Theatre that it gave rise to a unique tradition. On the night of a new production's opening, one seat in the dress circle is always left empty for Federici. This seat is a symbol of respect for the late performer and a way to acknowledge his continued presence in the theater. Those who believe in the supernatural say that Federici's spirit watches over the performances, and the empty seat is a gesture to ensure that he remains content. Many performers find comfort in knowing that Federici is there, watching from the afterlife, as they take to the stage. This tradition has been carried out for decades, and many believe that it brings good luck to the production. However, there are some who claim that when the seat isn't left open, strange and unsettling events occur, as though Federici's spirit is displeased. While Federici is undoubtedly the most famous ghost at the Princess Theatre, he isn't the only spirit said to haunt its halls. Over the years, there have been numerous reports of other ghostly figures and strange occurrences that can't be explained. One such figure is the Lady in White, a ghostly woman who has been spotted wandering the upper levels of the theater. Described as wearing a flowing white gown, this mysterious figure is often seen in the empty corridors after the performances have ended. Some believe she may have been a former patron of the theater, while others think she could be connected to one of the many tragedies that have occurred there over the years. Staff members working late at night have reported hearing strange noises, such as doors opening and closing on their own or the faint sound of music playing long after the audience has left. These eerie sounds seem to come from nowhere, and no logical explanation has been found. There are also reports of poltergeist activity, with objects mysteriously moving or disappearing, only to reappear in strange places. Lights flicker on and off without explanation, and some performers have felt an invisible hand gently touch their shoulder during rehearsals, only to turn around and find no one there. Given the long-standing reputation of the Princess Theatre as a haunted location, it has naturally attracted the attention of paranormal investigators. Over the years, several groups have conducted investigations within the theatre, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. During these investigations, many have reported capturing strange orbs of light on camera or hearing unexplained EVPs, electronic voice phenomena. Some investigators have even claimed to witness shadowy figures darting through the corridors, only to disappear when they approached. One particularly chilling incident occurred when a group of investigators was exploring the backstage area late at night. They reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread as they descended into the substage area, where Federici had passed away. One member of the group felt a sudden drop in temperature, and moments later, they heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching from behind. When they turned around, there was no one there, but the sound continued, as if someone was walking toward them. The ghostly tales of Federici and the Princess Theatre have sparked many rumors and speculations over the years. Some believe that Federici's spirit remains at the theatre because of his deep connection to the stage. He died doing what he loved, and his soul may have been unable to move on. Others speculate that the traumatic nature of his sudden death may have trapped his spirit in the theatre, forever tethered to the place where his life ended. Some even believe that the spirits of other performers who passed away during their careers have joined Federici, making the Princess Theatre a gathering place for the ghosts of the entertainment world. Whether these spirits are benevolent or malevolent is a matter of debate, but many who have encountered them describe a sense of unease that lingers long after they leave the building. 3. Old Melbourne Jail, Victoria. The story of Old Melbourne Jail begins in 1841 when it was constructed to house convicts in the rapidly growing city of Melbourne. At the time, the colony of Victoria was grappling with a rising crime rate, and the jail was built to deal with the influx of convicts and lawbreakers. Its architecture, like many 19th-century prisons, was designed to be imposing and intimidating, with high stone walls and narrow, oppressive cells. During its time as a working prison, Old Melbourne Jail housed men, women, and even children. Conditions inside the prison were harsh, with cramped quarters, poor sanitation, and minimal food. It was a place of despair and suffering, where the worst of society's outcasts were sent to be punished or rehabilitated. The jail became infamous for the number of executions it carried out. Between 1842 and its closure in 1929, 133 people were hanged at Old Melbourne Jail, many of whom were convicted of violent crimes such as murder, assault, and robbery. The gallows, located within the prison, became the final destination for some of Australia's most infamous criminals. One of the most significant moments in the history of Old Melbourne Jail was the execution of the infamous bushranger Ned Kelly in 1880. Kelly, a folk hero to some and a criminal to others, was convicted of murder after leading a gang that terrorized the Victorian countryside. He became a symbol of resistance against the colonial authorities, and his trial and execution became national events. On November 11, 1880, Kelly was hanged at Old Melbourne Jail, his last words reportedly being, "Such is life." His death marked the end of the Kelly gang and a pivotal moment in Australian history. The jail preserved the memory of Kelly, and it is said that his spirit, along with the spirits of other executed criminals, lingers in the prison to this day. Visitors to the jail often report feeling an eerie presence near the spot where Kelly was hanged, and some claim to have seen his ghost wandering the prison corridors. The shadow of Ned Kelly continues to loom large over Old Melbourne Jail, making it a focal point for ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts. By the late 19th century, Old Melbourne Jail's use as a prison began to decline. It was overcrowded, outdated, and unsanitary. With the construction of newer, more modern prisons, Old Melbourne Jail became less necessary. In 1929, it was finally decommissioned, and parts of the building were demolished. However, the jail's legacy as a place of punishment and death had already been established. It wasn't long after the prison closed that reports of strange phenomena began to surface. People claimed to hear the sounds of chains clanking, ghostly footsteps echoing down empty corridors, and disembodied voices crying out in the dark. One of the most persistent stories involves the sound of footsteps in the execution area, where many convicts, including Ned Kelly, met their end. Even when no one is in the area, the sound of heavy boots walking the halls is said to be unmistakable, leading many to believe that the spirits of the executed criminals still haunt the jail. The cells of Old Melbourne Jail are notorious for the number of strange encounters that visitors have reported. These cramped, dark spaces once held some of the most dangerous criminals in Victoria, and it's believed that the residual energy from these individuals continues to haunt the prison. Several of the cells are said to be especially active with paranormal activity. One such cell is the one where George Roberts, a convicted murderer, spent his final days before being executed. Visitors to his cell have reported an overwhelming feeling of dread, cold spots, and the sense that they are being watched. Some have even claimed to see a shadowy figure lurking in the corner of the room. The women's section of the jail also has its own ghostly stories. One of the most famous spirits is that of Elizabeth Scott, who was the first woman to be executed at Old Melbourne Jail in 1863. Her spirit is said to wander the halls, and many visitors report feeling a cold breeze or hearing soft whispers in the women's wing, as though Elizabeth's spirit is still trying to communicate. Another infamous resident of Old Melbourne Jail was Frederick Deeming, a notorious English serial killer who was suspected of being Jack the Ripper. Deeming was convicted of murdering his wife and children in Australia, and he was hanged at the jail in 1892. Deeming's ghost is one of the most frequently reported apparitions at the jail. Visitors and staff alike have claimed to see a menacing figure that resembles Deeming, wandering the halls late at night. His cell is said to have an oppressive atmosphere, and many who enter it report feeling an overwhelming sense of evil and malevolence. Deeming's crimes were so horrific that even in death, his spirit seems to carry the darkness of his deeds. Some paranormal investigators believe that the residual energy of his violent acts has left a permanent stain on the jail, making it one of the most haunted locations in the country. Over the years, countless visitors to Old Melbourne Jail have reported strange and unexplainable occurrences. During tours, many have claimed to feel cold chills suddenly sweep through the air, despite being inside an enclosed building. Others have reported hearing the unmistakable sounds of chains rattling or heavy breathing, as though someone is standing right next to them. One particular incident involved a group of tourists who were exploring the jail late in the evening. As they entered the execution area, the temperature dropped significantly, and several members of the group felt as though they were being watched. One person claimed to see a shadowy figure at the top of the stairs, but when they looked again, the figure had vanished. Another famous encounter involved a security guard who was doing his rounds late at night. As he walked through the corridors, he heard the distinct sound of footsteps following him. Thinking it was another staff member, he turned around, but no one was there. The footsteps continued, echoing off the walls, until the guard quickly left the building, too frightened to continue his shift. The eerie history of Old Melbourne Jail has attracted the attention of numerous paranormal investigators. Many have conducted investigations within its walls, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. Some have reported capturing strange orbs of light in photographs, hearing voices on recording devices, and even seeing ghostly figures appear on camera. One of the most famous investigations was carried out by a paranormal research group in the early 2000s. During their investigation, they captured what they believed to be the voice of a former prisoner calling out for help. In another part of the jail, they recorded the sound of chains rattling, even though no one else was in the building at the time. These investigations have only fueled the rumors that Old Melbourne Jail is one of the most haunted places in Australia. From the spirits of executed criminals to the residual energy of those who suffered within its walls, the jail continues to be a hotspot for paranormal activity. 2. Port Arthur, Tasmania. The story of Port Arthur begins in 1830, when the British colonial government established it as a penal settlement for some of the most hardened criminals of the British Empire. Located on the Tasman Peninsula, Port Arthur was chosen for its remote location, surrounded by water and rough terrain, making escape nearly impossible. At its height, Port Arthur housed over 1,000 convicts at any given time, and it became infamous for its harsh punishment and strict discipline. The prison was designed to break the spirits of the men who were sent there, with brutal punishments such as flogging, solitary confinement, and hard labor in chains. Convicts at Port Arthur were forced to endure backbreaking labor, whether it was building the prison itself, logging the surrounding forests, or working in chain gangs. The prison was also known for its use of psychological torture, especially in its separate prison, where prisoners were kept in total isolation, denied all human contact. Many inmates lost their sanity within its walls, and the echoes of their suffering still haunt the place today. One of the most notorious parts of Port Arthur was the separate prison. Inmates here were subjected to a harsh form of psychological punishment. They were kept in small, dark cells for 23 hours a day, allowed only an hour of exercise in silence and solitude. The goal was to break them mentally, to reform them by denying them any sense of identity or connection with the outside world. Prisoners were not allowed to speak or even make eye contact with one another. Guards patrolled the halls in soft slippers to ensure silence, and the men were often hooded when they were moved through the prison. Many convicts, already broken by the hard labor and punishment in the main prison, found themselves descending into madness in these conditions. The chapel in the separate prison was also a place of eerie silence. Convicts were forced to sit in individual stalls where they couldn't see or communicate with each other, their only focus being the preacher's words. However, the absence of human connection and the oppressive environment only further deepened the mental torment for those imprisoned there. The brutality of Port Arthur, its isolation, and the despair of the men who died there have left a dark legacy. Over time, reports of paranormal activity began to emerge. Many believe that the spirits of the prisoners, who lived in unimaginable conditions, never truly left the site. One of the earliest reported hauntings occurred in the separate prison. Visitors and staff alike reported hearing disembodied voices, footsteps echoing down the empty corridors, and a feeling of dread when walking through certain parts of the prison. Some have claimed to hear the sound of someone sobbing, as though the spirits of broken prisoners are still crying out in their suffering. The parsonage, once home to Port Arthur's chaplain, is another building where strange events have been reported. Ghostly apparitions have been seen wandering the rooms, and many have reported a heavy feeling of sadness or despair when entering the house. The sounds of footsteps in empty rooms, lights turning on and off by themselves, and an overwhelming sense of being watched are common experiences for those who visit. Port Arthur is not only haunted by the suffering of its prisoners, but also by some of the tragic events that occurred long after the penal colony closed. One such event was the attack by bushrangers in the 1830s. A small group of escaped convicts turned bushrangers launched an assault on the settlement, leading to a bloody fight that left both guards and convicts dead. Some believe the spirits of these men still roam the ruins, forever trapped in the violent end they met. However, the most tragic and haunting event in Port Arthur's more recent history occurred on April 28, 1996, when a mass shooting took place, resulting in the deaths of 35 people. This event shocked the nation and left a deep scar on Port Arthur. Many believe the spirits of those who lost their lives that day still linger, their presence felt by visitors who claim to feel a deep sorrow when they visit the site of the massacre. The violent history of Port Arthur has left behind more than just stories. It has become a place where the past seems to bleed into the present, and the energy of all that suffering has created an atmosphere that feels almost alive. Among the many ghostly tales told about Port Arthur, one of the most famous is that of the Lady in Blue. She is said to be the ghost of a woman who died in tragic circumstances in the early 1800s. According to the legend, The woman was the wife of a prison official and lived on the grounds of the settlement. She fell down the stairs of her home while holding her baby, and tragically, both mother and child died. Visitors to Port Arthur have reported seeing the figure of a woman dressed in blue wandering through the ruins of the old houses. Some claim to have seen her standing by the window of one of the old homes, looking out as though she is waiting for someone to return. The Lady in Blue has become one of the most well-known ghosts of Port Arthur, and many believe she is still mourning the loss of her child. Port Arthur's reputation as a haunted site has only grown with time. Thousands of tourists and paranormal investigators visit each year, hoping to catch a glimpse of the supernatural. Many of them leave with stories of strange encounters. One of the most common reports is the feeling of being watched, especially when walking through the ruins of the old prison or the chapel. Visitors have described feeling a cold chill come over them, even on warm days, and hearing strange sounds that have no explanation. There are also reports of shadowy figures seen in the windows of the ruined buildings, even though no one is inside. Footsteps echo through the halls of the old separate prison, and some visitors have claimed to hear the sound of chains rattling in the distance, a haunting reminder of the convicts who once lived and died there. Port Arthur's haunted reputation has drawn the attention of numerous paranormal investigators over the years. Many have conducted investigations on the grounds, and the results have only fueled the rumors of ghostly activity. Investigators have captured strange orbs of light in photos, heard unexplained voices on recording devices, and witnessed objects moving on their own. One famous investigation took place in the 1980s, when a group of ghost hunters spent the night in the separate prison. They reported hearing footsteps following them through the corridors, despite the fact that they were alone. One investigator claimed to have felt a cold hand on his shoulder, but when he turned around, no one was there. 1. Monte Cristo Homestead, New South Wales. Monte Cristo Homestead was built in 1884 by Christopher William Crawley, a prosperous local grazier. The Crawleys were one of the most prominent families in the area, and the grand two-story Victorian mansion was a symbol of their wealth and influence. The house, with its beautiful wrought iron lacework balconies, high ceilings, and luxurious rooms, was the epitome of elegance. For years, the Crawley family lived there, seemingly enjoying a life of comfort. Christopher Crawley had risen to wealth after a series of smart business decisions, and soon he became one of the wealthiest men in the region. Monte Cristo stood as a testament to his success. However, beneath the surface of this grand lifestyle, there was darkness brewing. Rumors started to circulate about the strictness of the Crawley family, especially Mrs. Crawley, who was known for her cold and authoritarian demeanor. The peaceful and prosperous life at Monte Cristo took a tragic turn after the death of Christopher Crawley in 1910. He died from blood poisoning, and following his death, his wife Elizabeth Crawley reportedly became even more reclusive. It is said that Mrs. Crawley hardly ever left the house after her husband's death, spending most of her time in a small room that is now said to be one of the most haunted parts of the house. Elizabeth Crawley lived for another 23 years after her husband's passing. Over time, the house became known not only for its grandeur but also for the eerie and tragic events that began to plague it. The house was home to a series of mysterious deaths and tragedies, and as the years passed, whispers of hauntings started to spread. The homestead saw more than its share of tragic deaths, some of which are the source of the ghostly rumors that persist today. One of the most famous and tragic stories is that of the young maid who fell from the balcony. Some say she was pushed by a supernatural force, while others believe it was simply a tragic accident. But the fact remains, she died on the property, and many visitors have claimed to have seen her spirit still wandering the halls. Another chilling story is that of a young stable boy who was tragically burned to death when his boss set fire to his straw mattress. It is said that the boy's screams can still be heard echoing through the house late at night. Perhaps the most disturbing incident involved a mentally disabled boy who was kept chained in the caretaker's cottage for years. Known as Harold, he was found dead in horrifying conditions, and visitors often report hearing the rattling of chains or seeing a ghostly figure believed to be Harold. Another death that cast a shadow over Monte Cristo was that of a caretaker who was brutally murdered in 1961. He was shot by a local teenager, and the bloodstains are said to still remain on the property, with his ghost sometimes spotted in the area. After the Crawley family left the property, Monte Cristo sat abandoned for many years. It wasn't until 1963 that the house found new owners in Reg and Olive Ryan. The Ryans restored the dilapidated mansion, but along with their restoration efforts came numerous reports of paranormal activity. Olive Ryan, in particular, claimed to have experienced many terrifying events. She reported that lights would turn on and off by themselves, doors would slam shut without warning, and there were cold spots in various rooms throughout the house. Visitors and guests also reported hearing ghostly footsteps, whispers, and seeing shadowy figures. It is believed that many of the spirits that haunt Monte Cristo are the restless souls of those who died tragically on the property. Some say that Mrs. Crawley herself haunts the mansion, particularly the room where she spent so much of her later years in solitude. Visitors often report feeling her icy presence or hearing the sound of a woman's voice in the still of the night. Over the years, Monte Cristo has become a popular destination for ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts. Many have reported strange occurrences, from doors slamming to sightings of ghostly apparitions. The house has been featured in numerous TV shows and documentaries about haunted places, and it continues to attract those curious about the paranormal. One of the most famous encounters took place during a paranormal investigation in the 1990s. Investigators reported hearing the sound of heavy footsteps following them through the house, but no one was there. Others have claimed to see the figure of a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothes standing at the top of the staircase, believed to be the ghost of Mrs. Crawley. Cold spots, disembodied voices, flickering lights, and even full-body apparitions are just some of the phenomena reported at Monte Cristo. Some visitors have felt an overwhelming sense of sadness or dread, as though they were being watched or followed by unseen eyes. Many people who stay the night at Monte Cristo report having nightmares or waking up to the feeling of someone standing over their bed. The eerie atmosphere, combined with the house's tragic history, makes it easy to see why it is considered one of the most haunted places in Australia. Monte Cristo's reputation as a haunted house has given rise to many rumors and legends. Some say that the house is cursed, doomed to be forever haunted by the spirits of those who suffered within its walls. Others believe that the Crawley family themselves brought misfortune upon the house through their strict and oppressive ways. There are also rumors of more sinister forces at work, with some suggesting that the land itself may be cursed. Paranormal investigators have speculated that the energy in and around Monte Cristo is particularly strong, perhaps due to the numerous tragic deaths that have occurred there. Regardless of what you believe, there is no denying that Monte Cristo Homestead has an eerie and unsettling history. The house's past is filled with tragedy, and it seems that the spirits of those who died there have never truly left.